There's a lot of acts that are hard to follow. Come on up, but you can do it. Arianna Huffington. Arianna, I don't know if you've watched her around the conference, but it's about every 8 minutes she has a new costume on. Arianna Huffington.
Thank you. Thank you, Art. You are magnificent. You know, when I walked in, the first thing he said to me was, I told you I would bring you to Monterey one day, and here we are. You know, this is my first TED. I'm kind of a TED virgin, as long as you discount that sort of strange business with Senator Ted Kennedy outside the ladies' room in the Jockey Club in Washington. So I have to say that I've been sort of gauging the mood of my fellow TED heads, and I consider it absolutely rapturous. I mean, I've never seen anything like it except twice before in my life, once at a Mooney rally, and the other time was on John McCain's bus in New Hampshire, where otherwise hardened members of the press sit around playing sort of goo-goo eyes with the senator. And I don't know if you've noticed, but they've started referring to the Keating 4 now, as opposed to the Keating 5. But other than that, this is just an amazing phenomenon. In fact, a lady came up to me and compared it to great sex. She said, you'll feel incredible while it's going on, and then you won't be able to describe it afterwards. So just to respond to the conference FAQs, yes, I do think that Richard is positively dreamy. And yes, I am ready to drink the special Kool-Aid cocktail as soon as he orders us to. And now for the vulnerable moment. The most frequently asked question of me in the last few months has been, what happened to you? Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? What are you? So I just want to tell you that I consider these categories completely obsolete. I consider the two-party system obsolete. In fact, the two parties are barely distinguishable. Effectively, we have the pro-choice corporate party and the pro-life corporate party. And if that's your only issue, you have a choice. Otherwise, you don't. And I basically now consider myself a kind of radical, progressive populist. And how I got here being a sort of peasant girl growing up in Greece, going to Cambridge, writing a book on women, and then writing a book on the crisis in political leadership in my 20s that was rejected by 36 publishers, which certainly taught me perseverance. And then moving here, doing biographies of opera stars and painters, and at 35, getting married, getting involved in 2 very expensive campaigns with my ex-husband, and discovering firsthand what modern political campaigns are like, sort of dominated by posters and consultants. I've now reached the conclusion that the system is broken. And over 5 years of writing a syndicated column, twice a week I had to face the reality of just how broken the system is. And finally, I've reached the conclusion that it's going to take a movement to change it. The way it took the civil rights movement, it's going to take a movement to change the system. The change cannot come from within the two parties. Just watch what they're doing to John McCain and what John McCain is doing to himself, trying to appeal to a kind of conservative base instead of staying on the reform agenda, which is where the country is. That is the moment here. François Gillot, when I was writing Picasso's biography, said to me, there are doors in space that you walk through, and there are doors in time that you wait for. And now we have this door in time. We truly have an incredible national moment for reform, but we have to capture it. It's not just going to happen. So my contribution to that is to write this book, How to Overthrow the Government, and to create a website, overthrowthegov.com, which is a kind of populist portal that links you to groups all around the country that are either working to reform government or to overcome poverty. And any of you who want to be part of this movement and part of this website, please come and see me afterwards. We'll link you. We'll link the website to whatever you are doing. And also, we brought on board Bill Hilsman, who did the media for Jesse Ventura's campaign. And he has created these television and radio ads for us, which basically deal with the 11-point manifesto that we have, which ranges from something very simple like hanging up on posters, because I believe that pollsters have basically dominated and are poisoning our politics, to doing something a lot more involved, like civil disobedience campaigns, direct action, demonstrations. They work. Just ask the WTO if you don't believe me. They really, really work. But starting with the pollsters, you know, if Abraham Lincoln had Dick Morris on his staff before he was about to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, a very unpopular document at the time, I can assure you that Dick Morris would have gone up to him and said, Mr. President, don't sign this. It's going to bring your approval rating down by 20 points. Sign something that everybody can approve of, like Secretary's Day. Fortunately, he didn't have Dick Morris on board. So if we can roll video, I'm going to show you just 3 30-second commercials that we are running right now about these issues. Yes? Yes.
Lady, what are your plans? Well, Dad, I've decided to overthrow the government. I'm serious. I'm gonna get active in a third party so we get some new ideas in Washington. And I'm gonna push for same-day voter registration because it works in favor of new candidates. Now, I know it's not exactly what my dad expected to hear, but I can't think of a more important job this year. Can you?
To find out more, visit overthrowthegov.com.
No?
Now that I'm retired, I can do the things I've always wanted to do. Like overthrow the government. It's true. I'm doing my part by refusing to talk to pollsters. Our political system is being wrecked by its obsession with polls. We need leaders with vision, who aren't guided by every rise and fall of public opinion. So hang up on the pollsters. Power to the people, baby.
To find out more, visit overthrowthegov.com.
Between soccer games, working, raising a family, I hardly have time these days to overthrow the government. You know, getting rid of those pesky lobbyists and special interest groups who are always buying off politicians. But if politicians won't clean up campaigns, maybe we can make it happen by boycotting products and companies whose money keeps their pet politicians in office. Let's make shopping a political force to be reckoned with.
To find out more, visit overthrowthegov.com.
That's it. So what we are trying to do through this movement is basically bring together two major issues. One is the corruption of our political system, and the other is the fact that America has become two nations. You get politicians, look at the presidential candidates, listen to them if you can bear it. All they talk about is our unprecedented prosperity. They vie with each other to talk about that prosperity, which has left out millions of Americans. 36 million Americans are living below the poverty line. The numbers for poverty and homelessness are unchanged, and we now have more homeless children than we had during the Great Depression. And yet you have the President of the United States stand up during the State of the Union address and say, the state of our union is stronger than it has ever been. What that means is that our entire national political conversation is about the one nation, that is doing well, that is doing better than ever. And the other nation is not just those below the poverty line, it's those that Mike Milken talked about, those who now are earning 20% less than they were earning 25 years ago. Those, and there are more people than they saw a child graduate from college last year who have declared bankruptcy. So there are truly these two Americas. And if we're going to be one nation again, we need to bring those two together. What gives me optimism, it's not what's happening in Washington, because what's happening in Washington is truly depressing. Over the last 2 years, we had a 37% increase in lobbyists. We now have 20,000 lobbyists in Washington, which works out at about 38 lobbyists per member of Congress. You know, what chance does the public have? It's no wonder that most people are tuning out and not even bothering to vote. Do you know that in the last election, 115 million eligible voters did not turn out to vote? Only 1/3 of Americans voted in the last election. So I wrote a satirical column predicting that one day down the road there will be just one voter. Let's call him Bob Gonzalez. And both political parties are going to be vying for his one vote. They're going to be running wedge issue campaigns, customized campaigns, and George Bush the 20th will be running on the slogan, "Vote for George. He'll do what's good for Bob." And it's not as absurd as you think, because how hierarchical is our system? More hierarchical than the House of Windsor. That we basically have the son of the guy who lost 2 times ago running, as it's going to be probably unless something dramatic happens, against the son of the former Senator Gore. I mean, what happened to the 250 million Americans? What happened is that most of them don't want to run. And some of the best of them are leaving the system, like John Kasich, who's been here, Bob Kerrey. They don't want to spend 2/3 of their time begging for money, which is what modern politics has become. And my own transformation, if you want, my own conversion came when I started going around and seeing just how much unacknowledged pain there is in this country, in homeless shelters, among parents who cannot get their child out of a dysfunctional, violent school. John Dory was magnificent today, drawing attention to that plight of millions of parents in this country. I talked to mothers who went to jail in Illinois because they would drive their child at 5 o'clock in the morning to another school away from their own district, which was a better public school, a marginally better school. Imagine if you are that kind of parent. And yet, what are we doing in Washington? Over the last 5 years, we've spent $40 billion on education. Do you know where it went? To give middle-class kids tax credits to go to college. That's not where the crisis is, but that's where the votes are. That's where the pressure is. And we spent $100 million on charter schools. So our priorities are completely lopsided. The same way, I'm sorry, Horace, if you're here, but we are spending so much money at the end of life and so little money at the beginning of life. You know, I think there should be an equivalent of the AARP, Future Voters of America. Or maybe, let's call it Future Thugs of America. We'll make your life difficult unless you take care of us now. And the other thing is that basically, because of the dominance of pollsters and consultants, major crises are ignored. They're being kept out of the political debate. Not just poverty, but the drug war. Is there anybody here who can stand up and say that the drug war has not been a complete failure? We're spending $40 billion a year. Drug use is up, and we have thousands and thousands of nonviolent drug offenders filling our jails. Do you know how many people we have in jail in America now? When I first read that, I did not believe it. We have 2 million people in jail in America, more than they have in China. And let me remind you that China is a totalitarian regime, a little more heavily populated than we are. And this is also the great racial injustice of our system. Mandatory sentencing is a complete fraud. It's a completely unjust system. It's been going on for 25 years. who have 60% of drug offenders in jail who are African Americans. And there you have Bill Bradley and Al Gore at the Apollo Theater at the heart of Harlem. And Al Gore does not dare come out against mandatory sentencing. He says we need to think about it. What do we have to think about it? It's a disaster. You know, when are we going to end it? How much more suffering does there have to be before we end that system? And why do we have so many spineless people running for public office? That's why I'm saying it's going to take a movement. Talk to any judge, talk to anybody involved in our justice system, and they'll tell you the mandatory system is a complete disaster. It's one of the greatest injustices perpetrated in the nation. Up there with education, you know that our system at the moment of public schools and education is more segregated than it was during the days of Brown versus the Board of Education. That's the real tragedy in this country. And yet, here's the moment for optimism, because there are days when I feel like Cassandra, and there are days when I feel like Zorba the Greek. And what makes me feel like Zorba the Greek is that all around America at this moment, there are things that are working, that are solving problems. We know what works in practice. People in Washington are trying to find out what works in theory. The truth of the matter is that we now know that it's not the great society that works. It's not the idea that the rising tide lifts all the boats that works. It doesn't. What works is taking those groups that are working and taking them to market, as John Dory said. That's why it's going to take all those social entrepreneurs that are here, the missionaries, not the mercenaries, who are going to leverage what works in order for it to reach the millions of Americans left out of our prosperity. And let's hear it from politicians. Let them stop talking about our prosperity as though that's the only thing that matters. You know, presidential elections are collective rituals of renewal. We really have a historic opportunity now to address these issues in the next few months before November. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a movement. We have these 11 points that people can choose from. And they range, as I said, from hanging up on pollsters. You can come on the website and take the pledge to hang up on pollsters, driving down response rates to single digits. That's our goal. They are now hovering around 20%. If we can drive them down to single digits, they will have to admit that the results are really useless, which they are anyway, because they can never predict anything interesting. Not a single pollster predicted Ventura's victory. Not a single pollster predicted McCain's New Hampshire victory. You know why? Because they're only dealing with a small, limited universe, which is how the two parties want it. You know that Karl Rove, George Bush's strategist, went on television after New Hampshire and said, 42% of people voted for Bush. It was all these mavericks who came and voted and complicated the election. Excuse me, these mavericks have the right to vote. So it is going to take that movement. But I really have this incredible sense of optimism because people around the country are coming together. And my final word is that in this room, we have the critical mass to transform this country. We have the imagination, the vision, the power. All we need is the sense of urgency and the collective will to really dramatically change things. Thank you.
Wonderful.